She shouldn't have said yes to Madison, but deep down, she knew she needed this night. Charlotte Lottie Carter stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she applied a soft coral lipstick. The reflection staring back at her seemed like a stranger. Blonde hair cascading in loose waves instead of the usual messy bun, a delicate floral dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, and those deep blue eyes that held a mixture of excitement and terror. "You look beautiful, Lottie," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the sound of her racing heart. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. A text from Madison. "Girl, if you bail on me now, I'm coming over there and dragging you out myself." Lottie smiled despite her nerves. Madison Harper had been her best friend since nursing school, and tonight she was determined to pull Lottie out of what she called her hermit era. 3 months had passed since Lottie had ended things with her ex-boyfriend David, a relationship that had felt more like a comfortable routine than actual love. The small apartment in the outskirts of Nashville felt quieter than usual. Lottie grabbed her light cardigan from the bed, her fingers lingering on the soft fabric. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby girl, sometimes you gotta take a leap of faith. Life's too short to always play it safe." Her mother had been gone for 2 years now, but her wisdom still guided Lottie through moments of doubt. Tonight felt like one of those moments, standing at the edge of something unknown, something that could either be wonderful or completely terrifying. The drive to downtown Nashville took 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Lottie's hands gripped the steering wheel of her reliable Honda Civic as she navigated through the familiar streets. The city lights twinkled like fallen stars, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, something magical could happen tonight. The Rosewood Lounge was nothing like her usual quiet coffee shops or cozy diners. Soft jazz music filled the air, amber lighting created intimate shadows, and well-dressed people mingled with glasses of wine and quiet laughter. Lottie felt overdressed and underdressed all at once. "There she is!" Madison's voice cut through the ambient noise like a warm hug. Her best friend appeared in a stunning emerald dress, her curly brown hair perfectly styled, and her infectious smile lighting up her face. "Lottie, you look absolutely radiant." Madison pulled her into a tight embrace, and for the first time all evening, Lottie's shoulders relaxed. This was why she had said yes, not just for the night out, but for the friendship that made her feel seen and valued. "I can't believe I let you talk me into this," Lottie laughed, adjusting her cardigan nervously. "Honey, you've been taking care of everyone else for months. Tonight, it's your turn to be taken care of." Madison linked their arms and guided her toward the bar. "Plus, I have a good feeling about tonight, call it intuition." As they approached the polished wooden bar, Lottie caught sight of a man sitting alone at the far end. He was tall, with dark hair and an air of quiet confidence that made her curious despite herself. He seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at his phone, but mostly just observing the room with those striking blue-gray eyes. "Earth to Lottie," Madison teased, following her gaze. "See something you like?" Lottie blushed, quickly looking away. "I was just people watching." But as they ordered their drinks, a glass of Chardonnay for Madison and a simple cranberry juice with soda for Lottie, she found her eyes drifting back to the mysterious man. There was something about him that felt familiar, like a song she'd heard before but couldn't quite place. What she didn't know was that across the room, Alexander Mitchell had been watching her too. And in a few minutes their eyes would meet for the first time. And nothing would ever be the same again. The moment their eyes met, the entire world seemed to pause. Alexander Mitchell had been nursing the same whiskey for 40 minutes, his mind drifting between quarterly reports and the strange restlessness that had been eating at him for weeks. He'd come to the Rosewood Lounge seeking solitude, not connection. But when the blonde woman in the floral dress walked in, something shifted inside his chest. She was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't just her appearance that caught his attention. It was the way she moved, graceful but slightly uncertain, like someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. Her blue eyes held a warmth that seemed to light up the dimly lit space, and when she laughed at something her friend said, The sound made him forget whatever he'd been thinking about. "You're staring," he muttered to himself, taking another sip of his drink. Alexander had built his life on control, on measured decisions and calculated risks. Random encounters in bars weren't part of his carefully structured world. But then she looked his way. Their gazes locked across the crowded room, and Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine curiosity mixed with an inexplicable pull toward a complete stranger. She quickly looked away, a soft blush coloring her cheeks, but the connection had already been made. On the other side of the bar, Lottie's heart was racing. "Maddie, he's looking at me again," she whispered, gripping her glass tighter. Madison glanced over her shoulder with the subtlety of a freight train. "Oh, honey, that's not just looking. That's appreciation with a capital A." She turned back to Lottie with a mischievous grin. "He's gorgeous, by the way. Tall, dark, and brooding, exactly your type." "I don't have a type," Lottie protested weakly. "Sure you don't. That's why you dated David the accountant for 2 years. Madison rolled her eyes. "This guy looks like he actually has a personality hidden under all that mysterious intensity." Before Lottie could respond, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. The man was standing up, adjusting his dark jacket with a fluid motion that spoke of quiet confidence. For a terrifying moment, she thought he might be leaving. Instead, he was walking toward them. "Oh my God, he's coming over here," Lottie whispered, her voice barely audible over the jazz music. "Breathe, girl. And whatever you do, don't mention your collection of romance novels or your habit of talking to your plants," Madison whispered back, then immediately plastered on her most welcoming smile. Alexander approached their section of the bar with measured steps, his blue-gray eyes focused on Lottie. Up close, she could see the subtle lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who thought deeply about things, and the way his dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. "Excuse me." His voice was deep and warm, with just a hint of nervousness that made him seem more human. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I couldn't help but notice." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "You seem to be having a much better evening than I am." Madison nudged Lottie gently and she found her voice. "Oh, we're just catching up. I don't get out much these days." "Alexander," he said, extending his hand to her first, then to Madison. His handshake was firm but gentle, and when his fingers touched Lottie's, she felt a small electric current run up her arm. "Charlotte," she replied, then quickly added, "But everyone calls me Lottie." "Madison," her friend chimed in, "and I was just telling Lottie here that she needs to live a little more. Life's too short to spend every Friday night reorganizing medical supply closets." "You work in healthcare?" Alexander asked, his interest clearly piqued. "I'm a nursing assistant at a private clinic," Lottie explained, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "It's not glamorous, but I love taking care of people." Something in Alexander's expression softened. "That's actually really beautiful. Not many people find their calling in service to others." The conversation flowed, easier than Lottie had expected. Alexander had a way of listening that made her feel heard, and when he smiled, really smiled, it transformed his entire face from serious to genuinely warm. Madison, playing the perfect wingwoman, excused herself to powder her nose after 20 minutes, leaving them alone at the bar. "Can I buy you another drink?" Alexander asked, gesturing to Lottie's nearly empty glass. "I should probably stick to one," she said, then felt compelled to explain. "I'm driving and I'm not much of a drinker anyway." "Smart and responsible," he said with approval. "I like that." They talked for another hour, about Nashville, about their work, about small dreams and everyday disappointments. Alexander told her about his physical therapy clinics, how he'd started with one location and was slowly building something meaningful. Lottie shared stories from the clinic, the patients who made her laugh, the moments that reminded her why she'd chosen nursing. When the conversation naturally lulled, Alexander looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Lottie, I know this might sound crazy, but would you like to get some coffee? There's a quiet place a few blocks from here that stays open late." Her practical mind said it was too soon, too fast, too risky. But her heart, the part of her that had been dormant for months, whispered something different. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. And as they left the Rosewood Lounge together, neither of them realized they were walking toward a future that would change everything they thought they knew about love. The coffee shop felt like stepping into a different world entirely. Moonbeam Cafe was tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small flower shop, its warm yellow light spilling onto the quiet sidewalk like liquid gold. Inside, mismatched chairs surrounded wooden tables worn smooth by countless conversations, and the air smelled of freshly ground beans and something sweet baking in the back kitchen. "I can't believe this place is still open," Lottie said softly, glancing around at the handful of other customers. A college student with textbooks spread across a corner table, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a young couple sharing a piece of chocolate cake. "The owner, Mrs. Benedetto, has insomnia," Alexander explained, guiding her to a table near the window. She figured if she was going to be awake anyway, she might as well make the best coffee in Nashville available to other night owls. "You come here often?" Lottie asked, settling into her chair. The question sounded more intimate than she'd intended, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "More than I probably should," he admitted, his smile self-deprecating. "It's become my thinking place. When the business gets overwhelming or when my apartment feels too quiet, I end up here." A woman in her 60s approached their table, her silver hair pinned back with bobby pins and her eyes twinkling with warmth. "Alexander, honey. And who's this beautiful girl you've brought to meet me?" "Mrs. Benedetto, this is Lottie. Lottie, this is the woman who makes the best tiramisu this side of Italy." "Oh, stop." Mrs. Benedetto waved her hand dismissively, but her pleasure was obvious. "What can I get you two? And don't you dare order just coffee at this hour. You both look like you need some real food." Lottie glanced at Alexander, uncertain. She hadn't eaten dinner, too nervous about the evening to manage more than a few crackers earlier. "What do you recommend?" "The grilled cheese with tomato basil soup," Alexander said without hesitation. "And if you're feeling adventurous, her cinnamon apple bread is basically a warm hug in edible form." "Two of each," Mrs. Benedetto declared before either of them could protest. "And decaf coffee for the lady. She looks like she needs to sleep. Sometime tonight. Regular for you, Alexander, because we both know you'll be up until dawn anyway." When the older woman bustled away, Lottie laughed softly. "She knows your coffee preferences and your sleep schedule. You really do come here a lot." "Guilty as charged." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the warm light. "What about you? Do you have a place that feels like refuge?" The question caught Lottie off guard with its sincerity. She thought of her small apartment, of the corner where she kept her mother's favorite chair, of the tiny balcony where she tended to herbs and talked through her problems with the basil plants. "My kitchen," she said finally. "I know that sounds boring, but there's something about cooking that quiets my mind, especially on Sundays. I make this huge breakfast and eat it slowly while reading or listening to music. It's my way of resetting, I guess." "That doesn't sound boring at all," Alexander said quietly. "It sounds peaceful. I can't remember the last time I had a peaceful Sunday morning." Mrs. Benedetto returned with steaming mugs and a plate of the promised apple bread. "On the house," she said with a wink. "Young love needs proper fuel." Lottie nearly choked on her first sip of coffee. "We're not, we just met." "Did I stutter?" Mrs. Benedetto asked with mock seriousness. "I've been watching people fall in love in this cafe for 37 years. I know the signs." She patted Alexander's shoulder. "This one's been coming here for months looking like a lost puppy. Tonight he looks like a man who just found something he didn't know he was looking for." After she left, and comfortable silence settled between them, Lottie broke off a piece of the warm bread, the cinnamon and apple flavors melting on her tongue. "This is incredible." "She's not wrong, you know," Alexander said softly. "About the bread? About this." He gestured between them. "I wasn't looking for anything tonight. I came to the bar to be alone, to think through some business decisions. But then you walked in, and? Lottie's voice was barely above a whisper. And for the first time in months, I forgot about quarterly projections and expansion plans and all the things that usually keep me awake at night. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Tell me I'm not crazy for feeling like I've known you longer than 3 hours. Lottie's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything her practical mind had been taught about dating and relationships screamed that this was too fast, too intense, too risky. But her mother's voice whispered again. Sometimes you gotta take a leap of faith. You're not crazy, she said, turning her hand palm up so their fingers could properly intertwine. I feel it too. Their food arrived and they ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Alexander told her about growing up in Seattle, about parents who loved him but never quite knew how to show it, about building his business from nothing because he needed to prove something to himself. Lottie shared stories about her mother, about choosing nursing because she wanted to be the kind of person who made others feel safe, about her quiet dreams of someday having a family built on the kind of love she'd read about in books. I should probably get going, Lottie said eventually, glancing at her phone. It was past midnight and she had an early shift the next morning. Of course, Alexander said, but she could hear the reluctance in his voice. Would it be okay if I walked you to your car? The Nashville streets were quiet as they made their way back to where she'd parked. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms from a nearby tree. When they reached her Honda Civic, Alexander stopped and turned to face her. Lottie, I know this might sound presumptuous, but I'd really like to see you again. Soon? She looked up at him. This man who had somehow made her feel more alive in one evening than she had in months, and made a decision that would change everything. I'd like that too, she said softly. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she rose up on her tiptoes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle, tentative, and perfect, and neither of them knew that this single moment would create 3 tiny miracles that would bind their hearts forever. 3 weeks later, Lottie stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. 2 pink lines, clear, undeniable, life-changing pink lines. She sat on the edge of her bathtub in the small Nashville apartment, still wearing her scrubs from the morning shift at the clinic. The test clattered to the tile floor as her hands flew to cover her mouth, muffling a sound that was part gasp, part sob. This can't be happening, she whispered to the empty bathroom. This cannot be happening. But even as denial flooded her mind, her body had been telling her the truth for days. The exhaustion that felt different from her usual work fatigue. The way certain smells at the clinic had been making her nauseous. The strange, persistent tenderness that had made her morning routine uncomfortable. And the missed period she'd been trying not to think about. Her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter, a text from Madison. Lunch tomorrow, I need details about your mystery man. You've been glowing for 3 weeks straight. Mystery man, Alexander. They had been texting every day since that night, at Moonbeam Cafe, sharing photos of their morning coffee, inside jokes about Mrs. Benedetto's romantic predictions, and long conversations that stretched late into the evening. He'd taken her to dinner twice, once to a cozy Italian place where they'd talked until closing time, and once for burgers and milkshakes at a retro diner where they'd played old songs on the jukebox and laughed until her sides hurt. But they hadn't. They'd been taking things slow, getting to know each other, building something real. Except for that one night. The night after their second date, when he'd walked her to her door and she'd invited him in for coffee. When coffee had turned into deeper conversation on her couch. When conversation had turned into kisses that were nothing like that first tentative one outside the cafe. When her carefully constructed walls had crumbled under the weight of feeling, truly seen by someone for the first time in her life. It had been beautiful. Tender. Perfect. And apparently, it had created a miracle she wasn't prepared for. Lottie picked up the test again, as if looking at it one more time might change the result. The pink lines remained stubbornly present, marking the beginning of a future she'd dreamed about but never expected to face alone. Because that's what she was now, wasn't it? Alone. She thought about Alexander's carefully structured life, his business plans, his measured approach to everything. How could she possibly tell him that their slow, thoughtful courtship had resulted in something so immediate and overwhelming? How could she ask him to rearrange his entire world for a relationship that was barely 3 weeks old? Her phone rang, Alexander's name lighting up the screen with a photo they'd taken together at the diner, both of them laughing at something ridiculous Madison had texted. For a moment, she considered answering, pretending everything was normal, buying herself time to figure out how to handle this. Instead, she let it go to voicemail. "Hey, beautiful," his warm voice filled her bathroom a moment later. "I know you're probably still at work, but I wanted to hear your voice. I've been thinking about you all day, which is becoming a dangerous habit since I nearly put salt instead of sugar in my coffee this morning." His soft laugh made her chest ache. "Call me when you get this. I have an idea for this weekend that I think you'll like." Weekend plans. Normal, simple weekend plans that belonged to the life she'd been living just 30 minutes ago, before 2 pink lines had changed everything. Lottie closed her eyes and pressed her back against the cool bathroom wall. She thought about her mother, who had faced this same moment 29 years ago, young, scared, and completely on her own. Her mother had been strong enough to raise a daughter with love and dignity despite the circumstances. But Lottie had always promised herself that if she ever had children, it would be different. It would be planned, wanted by both parents, built on a foundation of committed love. "What do I do, Mama?" she whispered to the empty room, wishing desperately for her mother's steady voice and practical wisdom. The silence that answered her was profound and terrifying. She stood up slowly, legs shaky, and walked to her bedroom. The pregnancy test went into her nightstand drawer, hidden beneath old greeting cards and spare phone chargers, as if putting it out of sight might make the situation less real. Her laptop sat open on her small desk, and almost without thinking, she found herself typing into the search bar. Pregnancy symptoms, early signs. The results that populated made her stomach drop. Every single symptom she'd been experiencing was there in black and white, along with information she wasn't ready to process about doctor visits and prenatal vitamins and life changes she couldn't even begin to imagine. Another text from Alexander. "Everything okay? You seem quiet today." He knew her well enough already to sense when something was wrong. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it made the weight of her secret feel even heavier. Lottie stared at her phone for a long moment, then typed back, "Just tired from work. Talk tomorrow?" His response was immediate. "Of course. Sweet dreams, Lottie." The heart emoji made her eyes fill with tears she'd been holding back since seeing those pink lines. He was falling for her. She could feel it in every text, every phone call, every gentle touch when they were together. And she was falling just as hard. But would he still feel the same way when he learned that their beautiful, slow-building love story was about to become something much more complicated? As she got ready for bed, Lottie caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked exactly the same as she had that morning, but everything had changed. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her still flat stomach, where something impossibly small was growing. "We'll figure this out," she whispered to her reflection, trying to summon some of her mother's strength. Somehow we'll figure this out. But deep down she wondered if love that was barely 3 weeks old could possibly be strong enough to weather a storm this big. 1 week later, Lottie found herself sitting in Dr. Patricia Williams's office, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. "Congratulations, Charlotte," Dr. Williams said with a gentle smile, reviewing the ultrasound images on her computer screen. "You're approximately 6 weeks pregnant. Everything looks perfectly healthy and—" She paused, squinting at the monitor. "Actually, let me take another look at this." Lottie's heart stopped. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly, just unexpected." Dr. Williams turned the screen toward Lottie, pointing to what looked like fuzzy gray clouds to her untrained eye. "Do you see these 3 distinct gestational sacs?" "3? The word came out as barely a whisper. Triplets, Charlotte. You're carrying triplets. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Lottie gripped the arms of her chair, certain she was going to faint. That's not possible. I mean, how? Triplets don't run in my family. Sometimes these things just happen, Dr. Williams said kindly. It's rare, but not unheard of. I'd estimate you conceived around 3.5 weeks ago. 3.5 weeks ago. The night she'd invited Alexander in for coffee. The night that had felt like stepping into a fairy tale and was now revealing itself to be something far more complex. I need a minute, Lottie managed, her voice shaking. Dr. Williams handed her a tissue box and a small stack of ultrasound printouts. Take all the time you need. This is a lot to process. Do you have support? The father, family, friends? Lottie stared down at the grainy images that showed 3 tiny miracles she'd never planned for. I don't know, she said honestly. I really don't know. The drive home passed in a blur. Lottie found herself parked outside her apartment building, engine off, staring at the ultrasound photos with a mixture of wonder and terror. 3 babies, 3 lives that would depend entirely on her, at least initially. Her phone had been buzzing throughout the doctor's appointment. 2 missed calls from Alexander and a string of increasingly concerned texts. Haven't heard from you much this week. Everything okay? Did I do something wrong? Lottie, you're scaring me. Please call. The latest message, sent just 10 minutes ago, made her chest tighten. I'm coming over. If you don't want to see me, just say so, but I need to know you're safe. Before she could respond, she saw his familiar figure walking up the sidewalk toward her building. Alexander looked tired, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his expression a mixture of worry and determination. When he spotted her car, relief flooded his features. She barely had time to shove the ultrasound photos into her purse before he was tapping on her passenger window. Lottie? His voice was muffled through the glass, but she could hear the concern. She unlocked the door and he slid into the passenger seat, immediately reaching for her hand. God, you look pale. What's going on? You've been so distant this week and I've been going crazy thinking I somehow screwed this up. You didn't screw anything up, she said quickly, the words tumbling out. This isn't about you, Alexander. It's about me, and I needed time to think. Think about what? His blue-gray eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to tell him everything and run away at the same time. Did someone hurt you? Is it work? Your health? The irony of his last question almost made her laugh hysterically. Her health was fine, better than fine, according to Dr. Williams. It was her life that had just been turned completely upside down. I'm pregnant. The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that seemed to expand in all directions. Alexander went very still, his hand freezing where it had been gently stroking her knuckles. Pregnant, he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Yes. She couldn't bring herself to look at him. From that night, 3.5 weeks ago. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything that was about to change. Lottie prepared herself for the questions, the accusations, the careful retreat that would signal the end of whatever they'd been building together. Instead, Alexander's free hand came up to cup her face, gently turning her toward him. Are you okay? He asked softly. Physically? Emotionally? Have you seen a doctor? The tenderness in his voice broke something open in her chest. I just came from the appointment. Everything's fine. Healthy. She took a shaky breath. Alexander, I know this changes everything. I know we've only known each other for a month, and this isn't what either of us planned. Lottie. He said her name like a prayer, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, expecting to see panic or regret. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like wonder. Is this what you want? He asked quietly. The baby, I mean. Because whatever you decide, I'm here. We'll figure it out together. I, yes, I think so. I mean, I'm terrified, but yes. She swallowed hard. But Alexander, there's something else you need to know. He waited, patient and steady, while she gathered courage for the revelation that would either solidify his commitment or send him running. It's not just one baby, she whispered. It's 3. Triplets. This time, the silence was different. Alexander blinked slowly, processing, and she watched his expression cycle through surprise, shock, and something else she couldn't quite identify. 3, he said finally. 3, she confirmed. I have the ultrasound pictures if you want to see them. Without hesitation, he nodded. Show me. With trembling hands, Lottie pulled the photos from her purse. Alexander took them carefully as if they were made of spun glass, studying each image with the same focused attention he brought to everything else in his life. These are our babies, he said softly, and the word our made Lottie's heart skip. You're not running, she observed, hardly daring to believe it. Alexander looked up from the photos, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Lottie, I need to tell you something I should have mentioned before, but the timing never seemed right. Her stomach clenched. Here it comes, she thought. The reason why this would never work. I was told years ago that I couldn't have children, he said quietly. A diagnosis. That became part of the reason my last relationship ended. I've spent so long accepting that fatherhood wasn't in my future. He looked down at the ultrasound photos again. And now you're telling me that not only am I going to be a father, but I'm going to be a father to 3 babies at once? Lottie held her breath, waiting for the inevitable conclusion that this was too much, too overwhelming, too complicated for a relationship that had barely begun. Instead, Alexander smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him all week. Lottie, I think the universe just handed us the most beautiful miracle imaginable. 2 months into the pregnancy, Lottie discovered that loving someone and living with someone were entirely different challenges. Alexander had insisted on moving in after the triplets revelation, not because he felt obligated, but because he couldn't bear the thought of her going through morning sickness alone. What had started as him spending a few nights on her couch had gradually evolved into shared closet space, and his coffee maker taking up permanent residence on her kitchen counter. You're hovering again, Lottie said softly, looking up from where she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by pregnancy books and baby name lists. Alexander paused in the doorway, a steaming mug of ginger tea in his hands. I'm not hovering, I'm being attentive. You've brought me tea 4 times in the last hour. The books say ginger helps with nausea, he said defensively, but his sheepish smile gave him away. Okay, maybe I'm hovering a little. I want to do something useful and you won't let me carry you everywhere or wrap you in bubble wrap. Despite her exhaustion, Lottie laughed. That's because I'm pregnant, not made of glass, and we've talked about this. You don't have to take care of me every second. I was managing just fine before you got here. Alexander set the tea on the coffee table and lowered himself to the floor beside her, careful not to disturb her elaborate organizational system. I know you were. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lottie. But that doesn't mean you have to do everything alone anymore. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. This was the Alexander she was still learning to navigate. The man who approached love with the same methodical intensity he brought to his business. He'd read more pregnancy books than she had, downloaded 3 different apps to track the baby's development, and had already started researching cribs with the dedication of someone preparing for a doctoral thesis. Look at this, she said, holding up a list covered in her neat handwriting. I've been trying to come up with names, but every time I think I have 3 good ones, I remember that these are going to be actual people with actual personalities, and what if I choose wrong? Alexander picked up the list, scanning her careful notes. Evangeline, Serafina, Clementine. He raised an eyebrow. Are we naming babies or characters in a Victorian novel? Those are beautiful names, Lottie protested, snatching the paper back. They're classic and elegant, and those poor kids will spend their entire lives correcting people's pronunciation, Alexander said gently. What about something simpler? Names that feel like us? Like what? He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing absent patterns on the hardwood floor. I've always liked the name Grace. Simple, but it means something. And maybe James, after my grandfather. He was the only person in my family who ever really listened to me. Grace and James, Lottie repeated, testing the names. What about the third baby? We don't even know if they're boys or girls yet, Alexander pointed out. The ultrasound next week should tell us more. The ultrasound. Lottie's stomach fluttered with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Each appointment brought new reassurances that the babies were healthy and growing properly, but also made everything feel more real, more permanent, more overwhelming. Her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Coffee date tomorrow? I haven't seen you in weeks, and I'm starting to think your mysterious man has you locked in a tower somewhere. Lottie showed Alexander the message, and he frowned slightly. You haven't told her about us, about the babies. I've been trying to figure out how to explain this. She gestured between them, encompassing their strange, accelerated intimacy. Hey, Madison, remember that guy I met at the bar? Well, we're pregnant with triplets and he's moved in and we're basically playing house despite knowing each other for 3 months. When you put it like that, it does sound a little crazy, Alexander admitted. But maybe that's okay. Maybe some of the best things in life are supposed to feel a little crazy. Before Lottie could respond, a wave of nausea hit her like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her mouth, breathing carefully through her nose the way Dr. Williams had taught her. Alexander was beside her instantly, one hand rubbing gentle circles on her back. The crackers are on the kitchen counter, he said quietly. And there's more ginger tea if you need it. I'm okay, she managed, though they both knew it was a lie. The morning sickness had been relentless, striking at random times throughout the day and leaving her feeling drained and fragile. You don't have to be okay all the time, Alexander said, echoing her earlier words back to her. I'm here for the not okay moments too. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago, and his usually pristine appearance was slightly rumpled around the edges. Alexander, when's the last time you went to one of your clinics? He shifted uncomfortably. I've been working from here mostly, delegating more. My assistant managers can handle the day-to-day operations. That's not what I asked. 3 days ago, he admitted reluctantly. But everything's under control. I've got good people in place and... You can't put your entire life on hold because I'm pregnant, Lottie interrupted. Your business is important. Your work matters. You matter more. The simple declaration hung between them, carrying the weight of everything they hadn't yet said to each other. 3 months ago, they had been strangers. Now they were building a life together around 3 babies who wouldn't arrive for another. 6 months and neither of them quite knew how to navigate the intensity of it all. I love that you want to take care of me, Lottie said carefully, but I need you to take care of yourself too. And your business. We're going to need both your career and mine to support 3 children. Alexander nodded slowly, but she could see the reluctance in his expression. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if you need me and I'm not here? Then I'll call you and you'll come home, just like any normal couple would do. Are we a normal couple? Alexander asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that made her chest ache. Lottie looked around her small living room, now shared with this man who read pregnancy books with the same focus most people reserved for best-selling novels, who had rearranged his entire life around her doctor appointments and dietary needs, who talked to her belly every night before bed as if the babies could already hear him. No, she said honestly. We're definitely not normal, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Alexander smiled, the tension in his shoulders finally relaxing. Madison's going to hate me when she finds out I've been monopolizing all your time. Madison's going to love you, Lottie assured him, especially when she realizes you're the reason I've been glowing instead of just looking exhausted all the time. You think I make you glow? Alexander, you make me feel like I can handle anything. even triplets and a relationship that defies every piece of dating advice ever written. He leaned over to kiss her forehead, soft and lingering. Good, because we're about to find out if that's true. Tomorrow's ultrasound would reveal whether they were having 3 boys, 3 girls, or some combination. But tonight, in the quiet of her small apartment that had somehow become their sanctuary, Lottie realized she was no longer afraid of the answers. Madison nearly choked on her latte when Lottie finished explaining everything. They sat at their usual corner table in Sunrise Cafe, the morning light streaming through the large windows and casting shadows across Madison's shocked expression. For the first time in their 10-year friendship, Madison Harper was completely speechless. "Say something," Lottie said nervously, her hands wrapped around her decaf coffee. "Please say something." "You're pregnant," Madison said slowly, as if testing the words. "With triplets, by the mysterious bar guy who's now living in your apartment and reading pregnancy books like they're instruction manuals." "That's a very accurate summary, yes." Madison stared at her for another long moment, then broke into the biggest grin Lottie had ever seen. "Oh my God, Lottie. This is insane and terrifying and absolutely perfect." "Perfect?" Lottie laughed despite her nervousness. "Maddie, I've known him for 3 months. 3 months. People don't build families with someone they've known for 3 months. People also don't usually conceive triplets on their first time sleeping together, but here we are," Madison said pragmatically. "Tell me about him. Really tell me. Not the surface stuff. What's he like when it's just you two?" Lottie felt her expression soften automatically. "He's gentle. Thoughtful to the point where sometimes I want to shake him because he worries too much. He talks to my stomach every night before bed. Just little updates about his day or things he wants the babies to know. Yesterday he spent 20 minutes explaining the difference between good coffee and great coffee to them." "He talks to your stomach," Madison repeated, her voice going soft with understanding. "And he's patient with the morning sickness, even when I'm cranky and impossible. He's already started planning how to baby-proof his clinics so the kids can come visit him at work. He bought 3 identical teddy bears last week so nobody feels left out." Lottie's voice caught slightly. "Maddie, he looks at me like I hung the moon and I can't figure out what I did to deserve that." Madison reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You showed up, Lottie. You showed up and let yourself be loved. That's not as easy as it sounds." Before Lottie could respond, she felt a familiar flutter in her stomach, stronger than the butterfly sensations she'd been experiencing for the past week. She gasped, her free hand flying to her belly. "What's wrong?" Madison asked immediately. I think they're moving," Lottie whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "Really moving, not just the little bubbles I've been feeling." The flutter came again, more pronounced this time, like tiny fish swimming in her abdomen. Tears sprang to her eyes as the reality of 3 small lives growing inside her hit her with fresh intensity. "Can I feel?" Madison asked tentatively. Lottie guided her friend's hand to the spot where the movement seemed strongest. They sat there for several minutes, both holding their breath, until another distinct flutter made Madison gasp. "That's your baby," Madison said, her own eyes filling with tears. "That's actually your baby moving around in there." "Babies," Lottie corrected with a watery laugh. "Plural. Always plural from now on." "Where's Alexander today? Please tell me he's not sitting in your living room timing your contractions or something equally obsessive." "I made him go to work. He's been neglecting his clinics, and I finally convinced him that pregnant women manage to survive for centuries without round-the-clock supervision." Lottie checked her phone. "Though he's been texting me every hour to make sure I'm okay. Can I meet him? Officially, I mean. Not just stalking him from across a bar." "Actually," Lottie said, a smile tugging at her lips, "we have an ultrasound appointment this afternoon. The one where we find out what we're having. Want to come? I think Alexander might appreciate having some backup moral support." Madison's face lit up. "Are you serious? You want me there for the big reveal? I want my best friend there when I find out if I'm having 3 boys who'll destroy my house, 3 girls who'll bankrupt me with ballet lessons, or some combination that'll give me gray hair before I'm 35. Honey, you're already getting gray hair. I've been too polite to mention it, but stress is not your friend. Madison grinned to show she was teasing. But yes, absolutely yes. I wouldn't miss this for the world. 2 hours later, they sat in Dr. Williams' waiting room. Lottie, Madison, and Alexander, who had arrived directly from his clinic still wearing dress pants and a button-down shirt that somehow managed to look perfectly professional despite his obvious nervousness. You must be Madison, Alexander said, extending his hand to Lottie's best friend. I've heard so much about you. And you must be the man who swept my girl off her feet and got her pregnant with triplets in record time, Madison replied with characteristic directness, but her smile was warm. Nice work. Alexander blushed slightly, and Lottie had to hide her laugh behind her hand. Maddie plays nice once you get to know her, she assured him. I like her, Alexander said quietly. Anyone who's been taking care of you for 10 years is okay in my book. Charlotte Carter? A nurse called from the doorway. As they walked down the familiar hallway to the ultrasound room, Alexander slipped his hand into Lottie's. Are you ready for this? No, she said honestly. But I don't think anyone's ever really ready to find out they're having 3 babies at once. Dr. Williams was already setting up the ultrasound machine when they entered. Well, this is quite the support team, she said with approval. Dad and best friend? Something like that, Lottie said, settling onto the examination table. The gel was cold against her now prominent belly, and the familiar whoosh of the ultrasound wand made her heart race with anticipation. On the screen, 3 distinct forms appeared, much clearer and more defined than they had been 8 weeks ago. All right, let's see what we can determine about these little ones, Dr. Williams said, moving the wand systematically. Baby A appears to be a girl. Baby B, also a girl. And baby C. She paused, adjusting the angle, and Lottie held her breath. Baby C is a boy. Congratulations, you're having 2 girls and a boy. The room fell silent except for the sound of 3 healthy heartbeats echoing from the ultrasound speakers. Alexander's hand tightened around Lottie's, and when she looked at him, she saw tears streaming down his face. 2 girls and a boy, he repeated softly, his voice thick with emotion. Madison was openly crying beside them, and Lottie felt her own tears start to fall as she stared at the screen showing 3 tiny perfect babies who would be in her arms in just 4 months. Grace, James, and... She looked at Alexander, whose expression was filled with such love and wonder that her heart felt like it might burst. What should we name our 3rd miracle? At 7 months pregnant, Lottie felt like she was carrying 3 watermelons and had the emotional stability of a teenager watching a romantic movie. Alexander, I can't do this, she said for the 3rd time that morning, standing in the middle of what had once been her spare room and was now a construction zone of cribs, changing tables, and enough baby clothes to outfit a small daycare center. Alexander looked up from where he was attempting to assemble the 2nd crib, his hair sticking up at odd angles and a look of determined concentration on his face. Can't do what, sweetheart? Any of it. This. She gestured helplessly at the chaos around them. I can't be a mother to 3 babies. I can barely manage to put on shoes without getting winded. What made us think we could handle triplets? It was the 4th breakdown she'd had this week, and they were coming more frequently as her due date approached. The rational part of her, mine, knew it was hormones and anxiety mixing into a potent cocktail of self-doubt, but the emotional part was convinced she was about to ruin 3 innocent lives. Alexander set down his screwdriver and approached her carefully, as if she were a spooked animal. Over the past month, he'd learned to recognize the signs of an impending meltdown and had developed strategies for talking her through them. Lottie, look at me, he said gently, taking her hands in his. You've been taking care of people your entire adult life. You chose a career in nursing because you wanted to help others feel safe and cared for. What makes you think you won't be able to do the same for our children? Because those are other people's children for 8-hour shifts, she said, her voice rising with panic. These babies are going to need me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the next 18 years. What if I mess them up? What if I'm too tired or too overwhelmed or too human? Alexander interrupted softly. Lottie, no parent in the history of the world has ever been perfect. The fact that you're worried about being a good mother means you're already going to be better than most. Your parents weren't perfect, and look how you turned out, she said, then immediately winced. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... You're right, though, Alexander said with a rueful smile. My parents did their best with the emotional tools they had, and I survived just fine. Better than fine, I found you. Before Lottie could respond, her phone rang. Madison's name appeared on the screen, and Alexander handed it to her with an encouraging nod. Hey, Maddie, Lottie answered, sinking carefully onto the rocking chair they'd placed in the corner of the nursery. Okay, what's wrong? Madison said immediately. You have that voice. What voice? The voice that means you're about to spiral into a panic attack about something completely manageable. Spill. Despite everything, Lottie found herself smiling. I'm just scared, I guess. The babies could come any day now and I don't feel ready. I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. Honey, nobody knows what they're doing with their first baby, let alone their first 3 babies, Madison said pragmatically. But you know what you do have? You have Alexander, who's been reading parenting books like their gospel. You have me, who has successfully kept my sister's kids alive during multiple babysitting sessions. And you have Dr. Williams, who assures us that you and those babies are healthy and strong. But what if... Nope, Madison interrupted. No what ifs. We're not doing what ifs today. We're doing I can handle this because I'm Charlotte Carter and I'm tougher than I think I am. Lottie laughed despite her tears. When did you become the voice of reason in this friendship? Somebody has to be, since you're too busy growing 3 humans to think straight. Now, put Alexander on the phone. I need to talk to him. She wants to talk to you, Lottie said, handing the phone to Alexander. Madison? Alexander said cautiously. Lottie couldn't hear Madison's side of the conversation, but she watched Alexander's expression cycle through surprise, amusement, and something that looked like relief. Yes, I can do that, he said finally. Thank you for everything. He handed the phone back to Lottie. She's coming over with Chinese food and a movie. Something about a girls' night that includes me because I need to learn to relax too. What did she say to you? Lottie asked curiously. That you've been the strong one in every relationship you've ever had, and it's scary for you to depend on someone else, but that it's okay to be scared as long as I don't let you push me away when things get overwhelming. The simple understanding in his voice made fresh tears spring to her eyes. I'm not trying to push you away. I've never had someone stay before, not when things got hard. Alexander knelt beside her chair, his hands resting gently on her enormous belly. I'm not going anywhere, Lottie. Not when things get hard. Not when the babies arrive. Not when we're both exhausted and covered in spit up and wondering what we've gotten ourselves into. We're a team now. As if in response to his words, one of the babies kicked forcefully against his palm. A moment later, another kick came from the opposite side, followed by what felt like a full somersault from the 3rd baby. They're having a party in there, Alexander said with wonder, feeling the movement beneath his hands. They're always more active when they hear your voice, Lottie observed. I think they recognize you already. Grace, James, and Hope, Alexander said softly, speaking directly to her belly. Your mama's a little worried about taking care of all 3 of you, but I told her we've got this figured out. Right? Another series of kicks answered him, and Lottie felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. They had chosen the name Hope for their 3rd baby the week before, and every time Alexander said all 3 names together, it felt more real and less terrifying. How do you do that? She asked. How do you always know exactly what to say to make me feel better? Because I love you, he said simply, and because being scared just means we care enough to want to do this right. The words hung in the air between them. The first time either of them had said I love you out loud, though it had been implied in 100 small gestures over the past several months. I love you too, Lottie whispered, her hand covering his on her belly. And I'm still terrified, but I'm less terrified with you here. Alexander stood and kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle and reassuring. That's all we need to start with. The rest we'll figure out as we go. A sharp knock on the front door interrupted the moment, followed by Madison's voice calling, "I come bearing lo mein and tissues, and possibly ice cream if someone's been crying again." "She has excellent timing," Alexander observed. "She always has," Lottie agreed, struggling to get out of the rocking chair. Alexander helped her up, his hands steady and sure. "Alexander?" "Yeah?" "When I go into labor, you're not allowed to panic. One of us needs to keep it together, and it's probably not going to be me." Alexander grinned, some of his earlier tension finally easing. "Deal. But I reserve the right to panic quietly in the bathroom for 30 seconds if things get really intense." As they walked toward the front door to let Madison in, Lottie realized that maybe she didn't need to have all the answers right now. Maybe it was enough to have people who would help her find them along the way. The contractions started at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, pulling Lottie from sleep with a sharp intensity that made her gasp. "Alexander," she whispered into the darkness, her hand finding his shoulder. "Alexander, wake up." He was alert immediately, the months of light sleeping paying off. "What's wrong? Is it time?" "I think so," she breathed, gripping his hand as another contraction rolled through her. "They're about 5 minutes apart, and they're getting stronger." Alexander was out of bed and moving with the controlled efficiency they'd practiced, turning on the bedside lamp and checking his phone for the time. "How long have you been having them?" "About an hour. I thought they were just Braxton Hicks at first, but..." She paused as another wave hit, this one strong enough to make her close her eyes and breathe through it. "These are definitely the real thing." Okay, Alexander said, and she could hear him fighting to keep his voice calm. "The hospital bag is by the front door. I'll call Dr. Williams and let her know we're coming in." But as he reached for his phone, Lottie felt a sudden gush of warm fluid and a pressure so intense it took her breath away. "Alexander," she said urgently, "I don't think we're making it to the hospital." The next few minutes passed in a blur of phone calls and controlled panic. Alexander called 911 while Lottie found herself unable to do anything but focus on breathing, through contractions that were now coming less than 2 minutes apart. The paramedics arrived with sirens and efficiency, transforming their quiet bedroom into a makeshift delivery room. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to try not to push," one of the paramedics said kindly, but Lottie was already beyond the point where she had any choice in the matter. "The babies are coming now," she gasped, gripping Alexander's hand so tightly she was probably cutting off his circulation. "They're coming right now." What followed was the most intense, overwhelming, and miraculous experience of Lottie's life. Grace arrived first, tiny and perfect, and announcing her presence with a strong, healthy cry that filled the bedroom. James followed 3 minutes later, quieter but equally perfect. And Hope, their surprise fighter, made her entrance 5 minutes. After that, the smallest of the three, but with a voice that could wake the entire neighborhood. "3 healthy babies," the lead paramedic announced with a grin. "Congratulations, Mom and Dad. You've got quite a family here." Alexander was crying openly, still holding Lottie's hand while staring at their 3 children with an expression of absolute wonder. "They're so small," he whispered. "They're so perfect." "They're ours," Lottie said softly, exhausted but overwhelmed with a love so fierce it felt like it might consume her entirely. The ambulance ride to the hospital was surreal, Lottie holding Grace while Alexander carefully cradled James and Hope, all 3 babies quiet now and seeming to study their parents with serious, unfocused eyes. The paramedics monitored everyone's vital signs and assured them repeatedly that despite the unconventional delivery location, everyone was healthy and strong. At the hospital, they were whisked into the NICU for precautionary observation. "Standard procedure for triplets," Dr. Williams explained when she arrived an hour later, still in her pajamas but smiling broadly. "Well, that wasn't quite how we planned it," she said, checking each baby thoroughly. "But sometimes these little ones have their own timeline. Grace is 5 pounds 2 ounces. James is 4 pounds 15 ounces, and Hope is 4 pounds 8 ounces. All excellent weights for triplets, and their lungs sound perfect. They can come home with us?" Lottie asked. afraid to hope. After a day or two of observation, absolutely. You've got 3 very healthy babies here. Madison arrived 2 hours later with coffee, flowers, and tears streaming down her face. I can't believe I missed it, she said, carefully washing her hands before approaching the bassinets where the triplets lay sleeping. They're so beautiful, Lottie. They look just like you. James has Alexander's chin, Lottie observed, studying her son's tiny face. And Hope has his long fingers. Grace is going to have your stubborn streak, Alexander said with a smile. She's already been trying to kick off her blanket for the past hour. They spent the day in a haze of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and visitors. Alexander's business partner stopped by with congratulations and assurances that the clinics would run smoothly for as long as he needed to be away. Several of Lottie's colleagues from the clinic brought gifts and offered babysitting services for the future. But it was late that evening, when the hospital had grown quiet and it was just the 5 of them in the dimly lit room, that the magnitude of what had happened truly hit Lottie. 9 months ago, I didn't even know you existed, she said softly to Alexander, who was holding Hope while Grace and James slept in their bassinets. And now we have 3 children together. Do you regret it? Alexander asked quietly. Any of it? Lottie looked around the room, at the man who had rearranged his entire life around her and their unexpected family, at the 3 tiny miracles, who had entered the world with determination and strength, at the future that stretched ahead of them full of challenges and joy she couldn't even imagine yet. No, she said with complete certainty. I don't regret a single moment. But Alexander, I need to tell you something. He looked up from Hope's sleeping face, his expression attentive. I'm scared, she admitted. Not about the babies. I know we can figure that part out. I'm scared about us, about whether what we have is strong enough to survive sleepless nights and stress and all the ways that having children changes people. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, gently rocking Hope as he considered his words. Lottie, 6 months ago I thought I knew exactly what my life was going to look like. Quiet, successful, alone. And then you walked into that bar and changed everything I thought I wanted. He stood carefully and moved to sit on the edge of her hospital bed, Hope still sleeping peacefully in his arms. I can't promise you that it's going to be easy, he continued. I can't promise that we won't fight, or that I won't drive you crazy with my need to plan everything, or that you won't scare me with your independence and your refusal to let me take care of you sometimes. That's not very reassuring, Lottie said with a weak laugh. But I can promise you this, Alexander said, his voice growing stronger. I can promise that I will choose you every day. In the good moments and the hard ones, when the babies are crying and we're both exhausted, when life gets complicated and messy and nothing goes according to plan, I will choose you and this family we've built, because loving you has been the easiest and most natural thing I've ever done. Lottie felt tears slide down her cheeks as she reached out to touch Hope's tiny hand. I choose you too, she whispered, every day for the rest of our lives. As if she could sense the importance of the moment, Hope opened her eyes then and looked directly at her parents. And for just an instant, Lottie could have sworn she saw the future in her daughter's gaze, full of laughter and challenges, and a love that would only grow stronger with time. 6 months after the babies were born, Lottie discovered that love wasn't just about the beautiful moments. It was about choosing each other in the exhausted, overwhelming, perfectly imperfect chaos of real life. Grace is crying again, Alexander mumbled into his pillow at 2:47 a.m., his voice thick with sleep deprivation. I'll get her, Lottie whispered back, but she was already halfway out of bed, moving on autopilot toward the nursery where their eldest daughter's cries were growing, more insistent. No, I've got her, Alexander said, catching her hand. You fed Hope 20 minutes ago, it's my turn. This had become their rhythm, a carefully choreographed dance of nighttime feedings, diaper changes, and brief moments of collapsed sleep, between one baby's needs and another's. They'd learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, to have entire conversations in gestures and exhausted glances, to find romance in Alexander bringing her coffee at dawn, or Lottie rubbing his shoulders. after a particularly difficult night. As Alexander disappeared into the nursery, Lottie heard James starting to stir in his crib. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, summoning energy she didn't really have. This was the hardest part, not the individual challenges of caring for 3 babies, but the relentless nature of it, the way one need blended into another until sometimes she forgot what it felt like to be anything other than a mother. But then Alexander appeared in the doorway. Grace settled contentedly in his arms and caught her reaching for James. "Hey," he said softly. "James is fine. He's just making those little sleep noises. Come back to bed for a few minutes. But if he wakes up, then we'll handle it together, like we always do." Alexander moved Grace to one arm and extended his other hand to Lottie. "You've been running on empty for 3 days. Please just lie down for 10 minutes. She took his hand and let him guide her back to their bed, too tired to argue. They settled against the pillows. Grace nestled between them, her tiny fingers wrapped around Alexander's thumb. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Madison hadn't dragged me to that bar?" Lottie asked quietly, watching their daughter's peaceful face in the dim light from the hallway. "Every day," Alexander admitted, "and every day I'm grateful she did. Even when we're both so tired we put coffee grounds in the washing machine instead of detergent." Alexander's soft laugh vibrated through the darkness. "Especially then. Those are the moments that prove this is real, Lottie. Not some fairy tale romance, but actual love. The kind that survives midnight feedings and spit up on your favorite shirt, and days when we're both so overwhelmed we forget to say I love you until we're falling asleep." Before Lottie could respond, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Madison. "How are my favorite new parents holding up? Need me to bring coffee and sanity tomorrow?" Madison wants to know if we need backup. Lottie showed Alexander the message. "Tell her yes to coffee, but we're managing the sanity part ourselves," he said, then paused. "Actually, tell her we need her here tomorrow afternoon. I have something I want to discuss with you, and we could use the babysitting help." "What kind of something?" Lottie asked, suddenly more awake. "The good kind," Alexander assured her. "The kind that involves making some decisions about our future." The next afternoon, Madison arrived with her promised coffee and an armload of baby toys that were probably too advanced for 6-month-olds, but would be perfect in a few months. She took one look at Lottie and Alexander's exhausted faces and immediately shooed them out of the apartment. "Go," she said firmly. "Walk around the block, have an actual conversation that doesn't involve discussing diaper rash, and remember why you liked each other in the first place. I've got 3 babies, and unlike you two, I've had 8 hours of sleep." They found themselves at Moonbeam Cafe, sitting at the same table where they'd shared their first real conversation 10 months earlier. Mrs. Benedetto spotted them immediately and bustled over with her warm smile and knowing eyes. "The new parents," she exclaimed, hugging them both. "How are my grandbabies? I have pictures from when you brought them in last month. They're getting so big. They're perfect," Lottie said, and meant it despite the exhaustion. Exhausting but perfect. "And this one," Mrs. Benedetto gestured to Alexander, "still looks at you like you hung the moon, even with baby food in your hair." Lottie's hand flew self-consciously to her hair, but Alexander caught it and brought it to his lips. "I love the baby food in your hair. It means you're mine." After Mrs. Benedetto left them with their usual orders, Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Lottie's heart stop. "Alexander," she breathed. "Before you say anything, let me explain," he said quickly. "I know this isn't traditional. I know we did everything backwards. Babies first, proposal second. But Lottie, these past 10 months have been the most chaotic, exhausting, beautiful months of my life." He opened the box to reveal a simple but stunning solitaire diamond that caught the cafe's warm light and threw it back in tiny rainbows. "I don't want to marry you because we have children together," he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I want to marry you because you're the strongest, kindest, most incredible woman I've ever known. Because you make me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. Because when I imagine the next 50 years of my life, I can't picture them without you." Lottie felt tears streaming down her face as she stared at the ring, at this man who had shown up. For every midnight feeding, every doctor's appointment, every moment of doubt and joy and overwhelming love. "We're crazy," she said through her tears. "People are going to say we're rushing into this, that we barely know each other." "Let them," Alexander said simply. "We know what we have. We know it's real." "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course yes." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then leaned across the table to kiss her while Mrs. Benedetto applauded from behind the counter, and other customers turned to smile at them. "I love you, Charlotte Carter," he said against her lips. "I love you too, Alexander Mitchell, and I can't wait to see what our future looks like." As they walked home hand in hand, Lottie's new ring catching the afternoon sunlight, she thought about the woman she'd been 10 months ago. Careful, guarded, convinced that real love was something that happened to other people. That woman couldn't have imagined the life she was walking back to now. 3 beautiful babies, a man who loved her completely, and a future built on the kind of love she'd only read about in books. When they opened the apartment door, they were greeted by Madison holding Hope while Grace and James played on a blanket on the living room floor, all 3 babies happy and content. "How did it go?" Madison asked with a knowing grin, then spotted the ring on Lottie's finger. "Oh my God, yes, I knew it. I called this the night you met him." As Alexander scooped up Grace and James while Lottie took Hope from Madison, their small apartment filled with laughter and love and the chaotic joy of a family that had been born from chance but was choosing each other every day, Lottie realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that didn't follow any rules at all. 2 years later, the autumn sun streamed through the windows of their new house in Franklin, just outside Nashville, casting golden light across the hardwood floors where 3 toddlers chased each other in circles around the coffee table. "Mama, Daddy, look," Grace called out, her blonde curls bouncing as she spun in a circle, arms outstretched like a tiny dancer. At 2.5, she had inherited Lottie's adventurous spirit and Alexander's determination, a combination that kept her parents on their toes. "Very beautiful, sweetheart," Lottie called from the kitchen, where she was attempting to prepare lunch while James tugged at her legs and Hope sat contentedly in her high chair, methodically destroying a banana with her small fingers. James had grown into his father's quiet intensity, preferring to observe before acting, though his blue-gray eyes missed nothing. Hope, their surprise fighter, had maintained her strong voice and stronger will, ruling her siblings with the confidence of someone who knew she was deeply loved. "The caterers just texted," Alexander said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his phone in one hand and Grace's jacket in the other. "They'll be here at 3 to start setting up for tomorrow." Tomorrow. Their wedding day. They had planned a small ceremony in their backyard, under the maple tree that had turned brilliant orange and red for the occasion. 50 guests, including Mrs. Benedetto, who had insisted on making their wedding cake personally. Madison was the maid of honor, naturally, and Alexander's business partner would serve as best man. But the real stars of the show would be Grace, James, and Hope, who would toddle down the aisle as the world's youngest wedding party. "Are you nervous?" Lottie asked, wiping Hope's banana-covered hands with a patience that had been hard-won over 2 years of constant practice. "About marrying you?" "Never," Alexander said, moving behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. "About whether James will actually walk down the aisle or just sit down halfway through? Absolutely." Lottie laughed, leaning back against his chest as they watched their children. Grace had moved on from spinning to attempting to teach James how to jump while Hope clapped from her high chair and provided enthusiastic encouragement. "Do you ever think about that night at the Rosewood Lounge?" she asked softly. "What would have happened if you hadn't been sitting alone at the bar, or if Madison hadn't convinced me to go out?" "I try not to," Alexander admitted, his arms tightening around her. "It scares me to think how easily we could have missed each other entirely." "Mama," Hope called imperiously from her high chair, holding up her empty sippy cup. "More." "Magic word?" Lottie prompted automatically. "Peas," Hope said with a gap-toothed grin that melted hearts and got her whatever she wanted. As Lottie refilled the cup, Alexander's phone rang. Dr. Williams's name appeared on the screen, and they exchanged a quick glance. The pediatrician only called when it was important. "Dr. Williams?" Alexander answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Alexander, Lottie, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," came the familiar warm voice. "I just wanted to call and congratulate you before the wedding tomorrow, and I have some news that I thought you'd want to hear." "Good news or bad news?" Lottie asked nervously. "Wonderful news. The medical journal accepted my case study about Grace, James, and Hope. Your triplets are going to be featured in a paper about healthy multiple births. They want to use your story as an example of how love and support can contribute to positive outcomes in high-risk pregnancies." Lottie felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at their 3 healthy, happy children. "They want to write about our babies?" "About your whole family," Dr. Williams corrected gently. "About how sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that come together in unexpected ways." After they hung up, Alexander and Lottie stood in their kitchen, surrounded by the controlled chaos of toddler lunchtime, and marveled at how much their lives had changed. "Mrs. Mitchell," Alexander said softly, testing out her married name. "Not until tomorrow," Lottie reminded him, but she was smiling. "Tonight I'm still Charlotte Carter, the woman who took a chance on a stranger in a bar. And tomorrow you'll be Charlotte Mitchell, the woman who chose to build a family with that stranger." "Daddy!" Grace appeared at his feet, tugging on his jeans. "Up!" Alexander scooped her up, and she immediately began chattering about the flowers they'd picked. That morning for the wedding bouquets, James toddled over and raised his arms to Lottie, content to be held while he watched his more talkative siblings. Hope, not to be outdone, banged her sippy cup on her high chair tray and announced, "Family." "That's right, baby girl," Lottie said, kissing James's forehead while reaching out to touch Hope's hand. "Family." Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Lottie and Alexander sat on their back porch, looking at the space where their wedding would take place in less than 12 hours. String lights twinkled overhead, and the caterers had already set up tables and chairs that looked magical in the soft darkness. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked, the question that had become their tradition, asked and answered honestly, even on the hardest days. "Completely," Lottie said without hesitation. "Even with the chaos and the sleepless nights and the fact that I haven't worn anything without stains on it in 6 months. I'm happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Good," Alexander said, pulling her closer on the porch swing they'd installed the week they moved in. "Because this is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" "Everything," he said simply. "Marriage, watching the kids grow up, maybe adding more chaos to our lives eventually, growing old together and embarrassing our children with stories about how we met." Lottie laughed, imagining teenage Grace rolling her eyes as they told the story of the bar and the coffee shop and the 3 babies who had changed everything. "They're going to think we're completely crazy." "They're probably right," Alexander agreed. "But it'll be our kind of crazy." As they swayed gently on the porch swing, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night, Lottie thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Careful, planned, convinced that real love took time to build properly. That woman had been wrong about a lot of things. She'd been wrong about timing, wrong about the importance of following rules, wrong about the idea that love had to make sense to be real. But she'd been right about one thing. When the right person came along, you'd know. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, destiny would smile on you and give you everything you'd been afraid to hope for. Tomorrow she would marry the man who had seen her heart in a crowded bar and chosen to stay for every beautiful, chaotic moment that followed. They would promise to love each other through sleepless nights and joyful mornings, through the challenges of raising 3 strong-willed children, through whatever unexpected gifts life decided to bring their way. And as the autumn stars appeared overhead, shining down on the house where love had taken root and grown into something stronger than either of them had dared to dream, Lottie knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. Would you have had the courage to love someone like that? And if destiny smiled on you the way it smiled on Charlotte and Alexander, would you be brave enough to say yes to a love that didn't follow any rules? What did you learn from this story about taking chances on love, even when it seems impossible? Your participation in this channel is very important to us. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.